On May 14, 1450, a dying empire's greatest army marched toward its own destruction. 100,000 Ottoman warriors, the largest force Sultan Murad II had ever assembled, stretched across the Albanian mountains like a plague of steel and fury. At their head rode the Sultan himself alongside his crown prince Mehmed, future conqueror of Constantinople. Their destination was a single mountain fortress defended by fewer than 4,000 Albanian souls. The mathematics were laughable: 25 Ottoman warriors for every Christian defender. Yet by autumn, that mighty host would flee in complete disarray, their banners trampled in mountain mud, their reputation shattered forever. Picture this. You're standing on the walls of Kruje fortress, 500 meters above the surrounding plain, watching an ocean of enemy banners blacken the horizon. 100,000 men, enough warriors to populate entire cities. Their supply train alone stretched 15 kilometers through the mountain passes, groaning under the weight of siege engines and bronze cannons, firing 200-pound stone balls. Before we descend into 5 months of the most audacious guerrilla warfare in medieval history, hit that subscribe button for Medieval Spirits. Because what you're about to discover is how Gjurg Kastrioti Skanderbeg escaped Ottoman slave who'd humiliated the empire in 30 battles, commanded 4,000 Albanian defenders at Kruje fortress against Sultan Murad. I's 100,000 warriors, 80,000 Sipahi cavalry, 20,000 Azab infantry, and massive artillery. How Skanderbeg positioned 8,000 troops, including 6,000 cavalry, externally on Mount Tumanishta, 3 kilometers north, deliberately weakening the garrison to maintain striking forces' tactical insanity by conventional doctrine that proved genius. How Ottoman mining operations failed when they struck solid bedrock Byzantine engineers had carved Kruje from living rock 5 centuries earlier. How mountain fog arrived with supernatural persistence, dropping visibility to 15 meters, and making Ottoman numerical superiority meaningless. How Skanderbeg launched guerrilla campaign using cliffside paths invisible to lowlanders, striking supply convoys at 6:30 a.m. when fog density peaked. How within 1 week, Ottoman camp discipline collapsed, soldiers refused patrol duty, disease spread, officers were assassinated in their own tents by Albanian infiltrators moving through fog like ghosts. How Vrana Conti rejected 10,000 gold crowns and autonomous princehood. And how, on June 20th at 7:30 a.m., Skanderbeg's 8,000 cavalry struck the Ottoman rear during their 100,000-man assault, routing the entire army in 17 minutes, 30,000 Ottoman dead, against 800 Albanian garrison casualties. This is how intimate terrain knowledge defeats empires. Now, let's go back to May 14th and watch 4,000 Albanians choose impossibility over surrender. Murad II wasn't just attacking a fortress, he was attempting to erase the most dangerous man in the Balkans from existence. Skanderbeg, the Albanian who'd escaped Ottoman slavery to become Christianity's most feared champion, had already humiliated the empire in 30 separate battles from his mountain stronghold at Kruje. This former Ottoman officer had united fractured Albanian clans into the League of Lege, transforming scattered mountain warriors into an unstoppable guerrilla force. The timing couldn't have been worse for Albanian morale. Just 2 years earlier, Ottoman treachery had delivered devastating blows to Skanderbeg's confederation. Svetograd, the strategic gateway controlling routes from Macedonia into Albania, had fallen after its own garrison opened gates to an 80,000-strong Ottoman army. Then came the night assault on Berat, captured through treachery that cost Skanderbeg his most powerful ally, when Gjurg Arianidi abandoned the cause in despair. By spring 1450, Albanian resistance seemed finished. Ottoman Akinji raiders burned villages with impunity. Even Skanderbeg's closest advisors whispered of negotiated surrender. Yet something extraordinary stirred in the mountain air around Kruje that spring. When Ottoman scouts brought news of Murad's approaching host, Albanian priests claimed visions of angels flying over their homeland. Skanderbeg himself declared that Street George had appeared to him in a dream, handing him a flaming sword to destroy the enemies of true religion. Whether divine intervention or desperate psychology, these visions transformed Albanian despair into fanatical determination. The fortress they would defend occupied one of Europe's most formidable positions. Kruje's ancient walls crowned a rocky pinnacle that rose like a stone fist from the Albanian mountains, its sides protected by sheer cliffs that made conventional assault nearly impossible. Two springs within the fortified courtyard guaranteed water independence. The approaches were so narrow that thousands of attackers would funnel into killing zones where Albanian crossbow bolts could find flesh with devastating accuracy. As Murad's vast army wound through the mountain passes toward this seemingly impossible target, the Albanian highlands trembled under history's largest army. At dawn on May 15th, Ottoman war drums echoed through valleys that had known peace for generations, their rhythmic thunder announcing the empire's arrival at Kruje's gates. From the fortress walls, Albanian sentries watched in horrified fascination as Murad's host deployed across 3 square kilometers of mountainside, their silk banners snapping in the morning wind. The numbers were staggering beyond comprehension. 80,000 battle-hardened Sipahi cavalry formed the army's backbone, their recurved bows capable of punching arrows through mail at 200 paces. 20,000 Azab infantry carried siege ladders, grappling hooks, and mining tools that would reduce Albanian walls to rubble. Supporting this killing machine came an artillery train of unprecedented size, bronze cannons capable of hurling 400-pound stone balls with bone-shattering impact every 10 minutes. Inside Kruje's ancient walls, Vranakanti surveyed his pitifully small garrison. 4,000 Albanian defenders, including barely 800 trained soldiers, the rest local militia armed with farming tools converted to weapons of war. 25 Ottoman warriors for every Albanian soul. But what made the situation truly desperate was about to reveal Skanderbeg's genius or insanity. Here's what made the situation truly desperate. Skanderbeg himself wasn't even present for the opening bombardment. The Albanian commander had taken 8,000 of his best troops, including 6,000 cavalry that represented the core of Albanian striking power, and positioned them on Mount Tumanishta, 3 kilometers north of the fortress. His strategy defied conventional wisdom. Rather than concentrating all available forces behind Kruje's walls, he deliberately weakened the garrison to maintain an external striking force. To Ottoman observers, it looked like tactical insanity. Splitting forces facing 25-to-1 odds seemed guaranteed suicide. The first Ottoman assault came at noon with devastating precision. Wave after wave of Azab infantry charged up Kruje's narrow approach paths, their war cries echoing off stone cliffs as siege ladders scraped against Albanian battlements. Albanian crossbow bolts found their marks with deadly accuracy, but for every Ottoman who fell, 3 more pressed forward. The mathematics of attrition favored the attackers overwhelmingly. Then something extraordinary happened that Ottoman chroniclers later struggled to explain. At the height of the assault, as Albanian defenders were being overwhelmed on the eastern wall, Ottoman artillery crews made a catastrophic error. Attempting to provide fire support for their advancing infantry, the cannoneers misjudged range and began dropping 400-pound stone balls directly into their own assault formations. The friendly fire was devastating. Entire companies of Azab infantry simply disintegrated under their own artillery, blood and bone matter painting the mountainside in crimson streaks. What happened next defied all military logic. Instead of pressing their advantage while Albanian defenders reeled from the bombardment, Ottoman commanders called off the assault entirely. The sight of their own cannons massacring Turkish infantry had shattered unit cohesion, turning organized assault into panicked retreat. But Murad hadn't conquered half the Balkans by accepting tactical setbacks. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the Albanian mountains, Ottoman engineers began the methodical work of siege warfare. Massive mining operations commenced against Kruje's foundations, teams of specialists tunneling toward the fortress walls with tools designed to bring down the mightiest fortifications in Europe. The plan was simple: undermine the walls, pack the tunnels with gunpowder, and reduce Skanderbeg's stronghold to rubble. The miners worked in 3-hour shifts, their picks ringing against stone in rhythm with Albanian defenders' growing desperation. Each hammer blow brought the empire closer to victory. Each shovel of excavated earth represented another step toward Albanian annihilation. By sunset, Ottoman confidence had returned. Tomorrow would bring Kruje's destruction. But at dawn, on May 16th, the Ottoman miners struck solid bedrock. Their picks, which had chewed through soil and softer stone throughout the night, suddenly rang against granite foundations laid by Byzantine engineers 5 centuries earlier. And something else was arriving with the morning mist that would transform this siege forever. The sound echoed through the tunnels like a death knell for Ottoman hopes. Kruje hadn't just been built on a mountain, it had been carved from the mountain itself, its walls rising directly from living rock that no amount of digging could undermine. Ottoman engineers reported the devastating news to Sultan Murad as morning mist rolled through the Albanian peaks, carrying with it an omen that would transform this siege forever. Mountain fog, thick as wool and cold as winter breath, began settling into the valleys surrounding Kruje with unnatural persistence. What seemed like mere weather to Ottoman observers was actually salvation for Albanian defenders who'd grown up in these highlands men who could navigate fog-shrouded mountain paths as easily as walking through their own homes. Here's where legend meets brutal reality. While Ottoman forces huddled in their camps waiting for the mist to clear, Skanderbeg launched the most audacious guerrilla campaign in medieval warfare. Using cliffside paths, invisible to lowland armies, Albanian cavalry descended from Mount Tumanishta like phantoms materializing from the fog itself. Their first target was a supply convoy from Macedonia. 18 ox-drawn wagons carrying enough provisions to feed 20,000 Ottoman soldiers for a week. The Albanian attack came at precisely 6:30 a.m., timed to the minute when fog density reached its peak. Ottoman guards never saw their killers approach through the mountain mist. Crossbow bolts whispered through white silence, finding throats and hearts with surgical precision. Within minutes, the entire convoy lay butchered, their cargo of grain, dried meat, and siege equipment now fueling Albanian resistance instead of Ottoman conquest. Picture this from an Ottoman guard's perspective. You're stationed on a supply convoy, confident that your massive army controls this territory. The fog is thick, but you've faced bad weather before. Suddenly, a crossbow bolt punches through your throat from a direction you can't even see. Your comrades are dying around you from an enemy that exists only as whispers in white silence. You're dead before you understand what's happening. But Skanderbeg's tactical genius went far beyond simple raids. He understood that mountain fog created a tactical revolution. Visibility dropped to 15 meters, making Ottoman numerical superiority meaningless. Large formations became death traps, unable to coordinate movement or identify friend from foe. Albanian fighters operating in small groups of 12 to 20 men could strike anywhere along the Ottoman perimeter and vanish before reinforcements arrived. The psychological impact was devastating. Ottoman soldiers who'd conquered half of Europe found themselves terrorized by an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't catch, and couldn't predict. Every morning brought fresh horror. Supply wagons found empty with their guards' bodies arranged in grotesque warnings. Patrol units discovered with their weapons missing and their horses stolen. Even high-ranking Ottoman officers assassinated in their own tents by Albanian infiltrators who moved through fog like avenging spirits. Within a week, Ottoman camp discipline collapsed entirely. Soldiers refused patrol duty. Supply officers demanded massive cavalry escorts for simple foraging expeditions. Disease began spreading through overcrowded camps as sanitation broke down amid constant fear of Albanian attack. The mighty Ottoman war machine, designed to crush enemies through overwhelming force, found itself paralyzed by an opponent who refused to fight by conventional rules. And Murad was about to learn that some men cannot be bought at any price. Meanwhile, inside Kruje's walls, Vrana received a visitor that would test Albanian resolve to its breaking point. A richly dressed Ottoman pasha arrived under flag of truce, his camels loaded with silk, gold, and precious stones worth enough to purchase entire kingdoms. The offer was simple: surrender, Kruje, acknowledge Ottoman sovereignty, and receive wealth beyond imagination. The alternative was death for every soul within the fortress walls. Conti's response would echo through Albanian oral tradition for centuries. Without examining the treasure, without consulting his officers, he replied with words that turned bribery into insult. Murad's gold cannot purchase what Albanian blood has already paid for. The Pasha departed empty-handed, carrying news that would enrage the Sultan and seal Kruje's fate as the empire's most hated target. By mid-June, Sultan Murad faced a crisis that threatened to destroy his reputation forever. Daily Albanian raids had reduced his supply situation to catastrophic levels. Ottoman soldiers accustomed to campaigns where victory came through overwhelming force found themselves on quarter rations, while enemy laughter echoed from fog-shrouded mountainsides. The empire's largest army was being starved into submission by 12,000 Albanian Highlanders, who struck like lightning and vanished like smoke. The Sultan's solution revealed both desperation and cunning in equal measure. If military might couldn't break Albanian resolve, perhaps gold could. On June 18th, Murad dispatched his most persuasive envoy directly to Skanderbeg's camp on Mount Tumanishta, bearing an offer unprecedented in Ottoman diplomatic history: 10,000 golden crowns annually, recognition as autonomous prince within the empire, and co-rulership over all Albanian territories. For a mountain chieftain leading a handful of highland warriors, it was wealth beyond imagination. Skanderbeg's response became the stuff of legend across Christian Europe. Without hesitation, without consulting his war council, he delivered words that Ottoman chroniclers recorded with grudging admiration. Even if Murad offered to make me co-partner in his entire empire, I would never suffer the name of Albania to be stained with this disgrace and infamy. The envoy departed, carrying news that would transform imperial frustration into imperial rage. What happened next defied every precedent of siege warfare. Instead of accepting his generous offer's rejection gracefully, Murad ordered the largest simultaneous assault in Ottoman military history. At dawn on June 20th, the entire 100,000-man army would attack Kruje from all directions simultaneously, overwhelming Albanian defenders through sheer mass regardless of casualties. It was mathematical warfare reduced to its purest form. Throw enough bodies at the walls and eventually they must fall. You're probably wondering how 4,000 defenders could survive when 100,000 attackers came at once from every direction. The answer was about to demonstrate that terrain knowledge defeats any numerical advantage when timing and coordination are perfect. Here's what the Ottoman battle plan couldn't account for. Albanian mountain warfare had evolved beyond anything Islamic military science understood. As Ottoman assault columns formed in the pre-dawn darkness, Skanderbeg's external forces moved through familiar fog-shrouded paths to positions that would transform the coming battle into a massacre. The Ottomans were about to discover that attacking a mountain fortress required more than courage and numbers. It required understanding terrain that Albanians had called home for 1,000 years. The assault began at sunrise with a thunderclap of bronze cannons that shook the mountains themselves. 400-pound stone balls crashed against Kruje's walls, with impacts that could be heard 15 kilometers away, while 20,000 Azov infantry charged up the narrow approach paths, screaming prayers to Allah and promises of Albanian blood. From the fortress battlements, Conti's 4,000 defenders unleashed volleys of crossbow bolts that dropped Ottoman attackers in windrows. But still they came, climbing over their own dead to reach Albanian steel. Picture this from Vranakanti's perspective. On the walls, you're facing the largest assault in Ottoman history, 20,000 infantry charging your position, while 80,000 cavalry wait behind them. Your garrison numbers 4,000, including farmers with pitchforks. The mathematics say you're dead within an hour. But you know something the Ottomans don't. Skanderbeg's 8,000 cavalry are moving through mountain fog toward positions the enemy can't see, can't predict, can't defend against. You just need to hold for 90 minutes. The real carnage began when Skanderbeg's 8,000 cavalry struck the Ottoman rear guard at precisely 7:30 a.m., just as the main assault reached its crescendo. Using mountain paths invisible to lowland armies, Albanian horsemen materialized from morning mist like avenging angels, their war cry of "Street George" drowning out Ottoman battle prayers. The psychological impact was instantaneous and devastating. Ottoman soldiers who'd been pressing forward with fanatic determination suddenly found enemies attacking from behind, their carefully planned assault dissolving into chaotic slaughter as they couldn't tell which direction threats were coming from through 15-meter visibility fog. Within 17 minutes, Ottoman military formation collapsed entirely. Soldiers fled in panic through unfamiliar mountain terrain, many falling to their deaths from cliffs they couldn't see through persistent fog. The mathematical certainty of Ottoman victory had become algebraic impossibility, as Albanian knowledge of terrain transformed 100,000 attackers into 100,000 targets, trapped in killing grounds they'd never recognized. By noon, Sultan Murad II faced a truth that would haunt Ottoman expansion for decades. Sometimes courage and numbers weren't enough to overcome an enemy fighting for their ancestral homeland. And the butcher's bill was about to reveal just how catastrophically Murad had underestimated mountain warriors defending their own soil. The silence that followed the Ottoman retreat was more terrifying than the battle itself. Where 100,000 warriors had stood at dawn, only scattered corpses and abandoned equipment marked their passage by sunset. Albanian defenders emerging from Kruje's walls like men awakening from nightmares found themselves walking through a graveyard that stretched across 15 square kilometers of mountainside. The arithmetic of destruction defied comprehension. An empire's largest army had simply ceased to exist. The casualty reports when they finally reached Sultan Murad's tent read like documents from an apocalyptic vision. 30,000 Ottoman dead carpeted the approaches to Kruje, their bodies forming literal bridges of flesh across ravines where panic-stricken soldiers had trampled their own comrades in desperate flight. Another 40,000 wounded or missing, most lost to mountain cliffs they couldn't navigate while fleeing through fog. The Empire's finest Sipahi cavalry, 80,000 strong that morning, had been reduced to fewer than 20,000 effective fighters by an enemy they'd outnumbered 25-1. By contrast, Albanian losses seemed almost miraculous. Conti's garrison had lost 800 men from the fortress walls, while Skanderbeg's external forces suffered fewer than 200 casualties, despite conducting the most audacious cavalry charge in medieval warfare. The mathematical impossibility of these figures prompted Ottoman chroniclers to seek supernatural explanations. Surely only divine intervention could explain such devastating reversal of fortune. Here's what the chronicles won't tell you about psychological warfare's true power. The sight of Sultan Murad II, conqueror of Belgrade and scourge of Hungary, fleeing on a pack mule while his empire's greatest army disintegrated around him, shattered Ottoman military mystique throughout the Balkans. Word of Kruje's impossible defense spread like wildfire through Christian Europe, carried by Venetian merchants who'd witnessed the aftermath firsthand. The material consequences were equally staggering. Scattered across the Albanian mountainsides lay enough abandoned Ottoman equipment to outfit 10 armies. Bronze cannons worth their weight in gold, siege engines that had conquered Constantinople's outer fortifications, thousands of recurved bows crafted by the finest weaponsmiths in Anatolia. Most valuable of all was the Sultan's war chest, 50,000 gold pieces intended to finance the entire Albanian campaign, now funding Albanian resistance for the next decade. But the strategic implications reached far beyond mere treasure. For the first time in Ottoman expansion, a small Christian force had demonstrated that imperial armies could be defeated through superior knowledge of terrain and tactical innovation. The myth of Ottoman invincibility, carefully cultivated through decades of conquest, lay as shattered as the corpses littering Kruje's approaches. Skanderbeg himself, surveying the battlefield where his tactical genius had rewritten the rules of medieval warfare, understood the victory's true significance. This wasn't merely Albanian triumph over Ottoman oppression, but proof that small nations could preserve their independence against imperial expansion through courage, cunning, and intimate knowledge of their homeland's geography. The reverberations of Kruje's impossible defense reshaped the strategic landscape of southeastern Europe for the next 2 decades. News of Murad's humiliation reached every Christian court from Rome to Moscow, transforming Skanderbeg from obscure Albanian chieftain into Christianity's most celebrated champion overnight. Pope Nicholas V, who had watched Ottoman expansion with growing despair, immediately proclaimed the victory a divine miracle and began organizing the first serious crusade in generations. Venetian merchants who controlled trade routes throughout the eastern Mediterranean suddenly found themselves financing Albanian resistance with enthusiasm that bordered on religious fervor. The military implications proved even more profound than the political ones. Ottoman tactical doctrine, which had relied on overwhelming numerical superiority since the empire's founding, underwent fundamental revision after Kruje's lessons were absorbed by military strategists in Constantinople. Never again would Ottoman commanders assume that large armies automatically guaranteed victory against defenders who understood their terrain intimately. Military academies still study Skanderbeg's tactical innovations at Kruje as the definitive example of asymmetric warfare principles. His use of mountain fog as natural concealment, his coordination of internal garrison defense with external cavalry strikes, his systematic destruction of enemy supply lines while avoiding pitched battles established a template for successful resistance that would be copied by everyone from Swiss mountaineers to American colonists 3 centuries later. The 18-year respite Skanderbeg's victory purchased for Christian Europe cannot be calculated in mere military terms. During those crucial years, while Ottoman attention focused on rebuilding forces shattered at Kruje, Hungarian fortifications were strengthened, Venetian naval power expanded, and papal coalitions organized with renewed confidence. When Ottoman expansion finally resumed under Mehmed II, it faced a Europe that had learned valuable lessons about resisting seemingly unstoppable imperial momentum. Albanian oral tradition preserves the memory of Kruje's defense with reverence that borders on religious devotion. The battle became a foundational myth for a people who would endure 5 centuries of Ottoman occupation, while never forgetting that their ancestors had once made an empire bleed. Even today, visitors to Kruje's restored fortress can stand on the same battlements where Conti's 4,000 defenders held back 100,000 attackers and feel the weight of impossible courage transformed into historical reality. The strategic pattern Skanderbeg established, using superior knowledge of local terrain to negate enemy numerical advantages, would echo through military history, from William Wallace's victories in Scottish Highlands to Mao's guerrilla campaigns in Chinese mountains. On May 14, 1450, 4,000 Albanian defenders faced mathematical annihilation against 100,000 Ottoman warriors commanded by Sultan Murad II himself. By October, that empire's greatest army had fled in complete disarray, 30,000 dead, 40,000 wounded or missing, their reputation destroyed by Highlanders who refused to accept the arithmetic of conquest. The mathematics revealed a devastating truth. Intimate terrain knowledge defeats any numerical advantage when combined with tactical patience and perfect timing. Skanderbeg's genius was recognizing that mountain fog dropping visibility to 15 meters transformed Ottoman superiority into Ottoman blindness, that cliffside paths learned in childhood became highways invisible to lowland armies, that guerrilla raids on supply convoys starved empires faster than siege engines conquered fortresses. So here's what you need to understand about Kruje. The mathematics weren't just about 25-to-1 odds or fog concealment. They were about recognizing that empires fight by rules requiring open terrain and supply lines, that defenders who know every path, every cliff, every fog pattern fight by different rules entirely. Ottoman mining failed because Byzantine engineers had carved Kruje from living rock 5 centuries earlier terrain knowledge across generations. Albanian cavalry struck at 7:30 a.m. because that's when fog density peaked, weather knowledge from childhood. Vrana Conti rejected 10,000 gold crowns because some things can't be purchased, cultural knowledge about what matters. The 17-minute rout on June 20th proved that when defenders understand their homeland better than attackers understand warfare, numerical superiority becomes numerical vulnerability. Subscribe to Medieval Spirits and share this video so others understand how asymmetric warfare defeats empires through terrain mastery. Leave a comment telling me which modern guerrilla campaign best demonstrates Skanderbeg's principles: intimate terrain knowledge, weather exploitation, supply line interdiction, and refusing to fight on the enemy's terms. Because here's the real lesson from Kruje. When 4,000 defenders face 100,000 attackers on familiar ground, the question isn't about courage or numbers, it's about who knows the terrain better. Skanderbeg chose fog over fortifications, cliffside paths over pitched battles, supply raids over siege endurance. 5 months later, 30,000 Ottoman corpses prove that sometimes the impossible becomes inevitable when desperate courage meets tactical brilliance on ancestral soil. Sometimes empires learn the meaning of defeat from Highlanders who turn mountains into weapons,